Cool. It's good to see everybody's morning faces. I think I know most of you, at least, we've met occasionally. I am Clancy Nelson. I'm the lead forecaster here at ESAC. And who's ready to get geeky? That's the kind of response I'm looking for my presentation. So we're going to go over the Swiss Snowpack model, what it is and how it works, and what ESAC has been doing with it and why. And then kind of a look at the future, the very near future. What used to be the distant future is now the near future, and the ways it's being used elsewhere in North America and across the globe, and how ESAC hopes to expand into that. So a little bit about me. I'm a professional snow geek is how I think of myself. And I am not a scientist, but I am science-y. But I'm very much a practitioner. And I am also not a software developer or a computer geek. Despite that, I spent 4 years at the Flathead Avalanche Center in Montana, and I think it was better to Excel or something. I don't know, but I got put in charge of technology, and that developed into, hey, can you do this snowpack modeling thing for us? I think it might be useful. And that was 6 or 8 years ago. So I switched from being only skis on to sitting behind a computer occasionally as well. And there's some people that I need to thank that made this program at ESAC possible before I go on. So I'm going to run through a list of folks real quick. Zach Guy at the Crested Butte Avalanche Center, Simon Horton at Avalanche Canada, Chris Gibson, Joe Messina, and Brian Brong at the National Weather Service, Zachary Miller at the Sawtooth Avalanche Center, Josh Lipkowitz at the Flathead Avalanche Center, you'll hear from him soon today, and Travis Morrison from the Utah Avalanche Center. They are all the real scientists that gave me a lot of their technical expertise. And then Rob and Laura Paluski from the National Park Service, Mike Phillips at Mammoth Mountain Ski Patrol, and all the staff, past and present, at ESAC and FAC for digging holes for us to make sure this thing was doing what we wanted it to do. And then finally, the real computer geeks, Jess May and Mike Kakahashi, who helped me write code that really got our program off the ground. So a little bit of background here first. The weather models that we all look at, right? Everybody's looked at weather models to at least see how much one thing thinks it's going to snow. Yes, I'm seeing nods, hands, awesome, cool. I got to get some participation to keep you awake during this presentation. So those weather models intake observations, if you can believe it. They take in satellite, radar, weather balloon soundings, all kinds of observations. And then they crunch a lot of really technical numbers and some really advanced calculations. That's what they do. They're physics-based models. And then they crank some more numbers to take the results of their first calculations into the future. And they project that across a portion of the globe. They are calculating wind speed, temperature, relative humidity for various elevations above the ground in the atmosphere. And they have what's called a resolution, which is how fine or how coarse they can project their data. So some models break the ground cover up into like a 9-kilometer square grid, and there's a bunch of squares on the ground with corresponding columns in the atmosphere. And some finer resolution models use a 3-kilometer or even a 1.5-kilometer grid. These key terms are going to be important. So avalanche forecasters intake observations about the snowpack and weather model data, and then we read, and weather station data, and then we read weather models, and we put that into our mental model, which is our best understanding of the most recent snow science, our expert experience, our knowledge about our forecast area, and then we try to project how that's going to change the snowpack across our terrain. And the avalanche forecast, if you haven't thought about it before, it is itself a model. We use what's called the conceptual model of avalanche hazard, and that's a bunch of risk matrices and agreed upon definitions of things to help come up with the danger rating and the avalanche problems. And our resolution, the avalanche hazard resolution, can be a single avalanche path like that's going to hit a highway, or a single mountain like a ski resort, or if you're like ESAC or other regional avalanche forecast centers, a whole mountain range. So we as forecasters rely on the best and most recent data to support our decision making. And weather models, they have a lot of different data that's coming in. It comes from different places, it's diverse, and it's reliable. And regional avalanche forecasters, ours is not so much. It seems like we're always hurting for more information about the snowpack, and we're always hurting for more and more reliable weather station data. So enter Snowpack, all caps. Snowpack was developed by the Swiss, and it simulates the development of the winter snowpack throughout the season based on weather data. And it's a physics-based model. So it basically takes in weather data and then crunches a bunch of thermodynamic equations about energy and mass conservation. And then it spits out snowpack stratigraphy. The model eats 3 files. It eats an initial file, and then it eats a starting state file, whether that's information about an already simulated snowpack or the bare ground. And then it gets weather data in order to conduct its calculations. That weather data can come from several sources. It can come from automated weather stations, which give the most accurate snow output up until the present, right? You can also get it, weather data from numerical weather prediction models, those weather models that we all look at, and they give estimated snowpack stratigraphy because of the weather model resolution. But they also, the cool thing is there's a forecast mode. So instead of getting what the snowpack might look like to now, we can go as far into the future as the weather model goes. That's especially useful when you don't have enough variables from your local weather stations to run the snowpack model. It needs all of these different variables, and not all of our weather stations have the instruments to give us those variables. And it's also super great in cases where that data becomes unreliable, like say during a major storm, or there are breaks in the data because the station gets buried and nobody can maintain it. And then finally, you can build the snowpack with automated weather station data to present, and then force it into the future. That just means push it forward into the future with weather model data. Or we can dig an actual hole in the ground and put that into the computer, and then start with an actual physical starting point, and then push the model forward and see how things might change with numerical weather prediction model data into the future. So once you look at it, what we're looking at here is last season's snowpack model. On the left here, what we have is the entire season snowpack with the date across the bottom, and then the height is the depth of the snow, and then the color coding are the different types of snow grains. People that are used to reading Snowpack graphs will know what those look like, and that's interactive. So you see my black line, I can scroll anywhere throughout the season and freeze on that and zoom in on it, and then on the right, that's what that individual snow pit graph would look like if I dug a snow pit in that virtual snowpack at that date. So it's hardness or density across the x-axis, and the y-axis is depth. And then again, it shows all the snow microstructure that we talk about in those graphs, the snow grain type, the hardness, the size of the grains, the temperature. So another thing about the snowpack model is snowpack model validation is super important for running a model operationally. Validation just means you're trying to see if the model matches up with reality in the real world. So it's useful for us to go out and get actual snow profiles for our model points for 3 main reasons. One is it allows forecasters to learn to read the model. Like, what does this thing do well? What is it missing? What does it think is happening that's not happening? And so this is a couple examples of our recent actual physical profiles on the left and the modeled profiles on the right. Another thing that validation does is it allows us to learn what terrain the model best represents. So the Tioga Pass weather station is in the red flag there, and then the blue dots are the center of those grids for a weather model. And the one that has the information up about it is our best guess for which one we should be using for the Tioga Pass weather station. And then the third thing, please excuse these lines of code. This is the input weather file, and every hour is a line of weather data. And these unit multipliers here, one thing that digging an actual hole in the ground does is I can look at the actual graph of the snowpack and then look at the model, and I can see what's wrong, and I can pull data from the closest weather station, and I can figure out what the differences are between the weather station data and the weather model. And these multipliers, every single one of these lines of data gets multiplied by that multiplier when I run the model. So if the weather model is under predicting precip, I can bump the multiplier up to more than 1, for example. So we're going to talk about why ESAC has been at the forefront of snowpack modeling in North America, and we really have. So importantly, we need to add diversity to our data stream. We need more information, and we need that information to be useful directly about the snowpack. And then we also want to give our forecasters operational experience with snowpack, and that's the exciting thing that I'll talk about towards the end of my presentation. It's very exciting. Cool, so our flow chart here basically sums up how we're doing ESAC at Snowpack. If you were to read a scientific paper, this would be our methods section, right? So it's a small modeling program. It consists of daily runs of the Snowpack model using the HRRR weather model, the high resolution rapid refresh model. And then a second aspect in orange here, a validation process that both informs the daily runs of our model and allows us to force the model forward from a physical snow pit. So we're just going to look at the daily runs first here. We are running the model for 4 different points near weather stations across our forecast area. These are both places that have a weather station, so I can validate the model, but they're also places that are hard to get to and we rarely get observations from. We are forcing the model using the HRRR weather model, as I said, because it has a good balance of resolution. It's called the high resolution, it has a 3-kilometer grid. And then it has data frequency. It gives me data every hour. And then it has a lead time of 48 hours. So every night at midnight, I can get a 48-hour forecast from the HRRR weather model. So we can look at our snowpack model all day today and into midnight tomorrow. So these are all of the HRRR weather model points in our forecast area. It's a lot, right? Because of time and funding and computing limitations, we selected carefully based on our experience and some advice from the National Weather Service, the closest, most representative HRRR model points to those weather stations. And so we've picked model points that are both close to the weather stations but have a similar aspect and elevation to the weather stations because the ground is not flat, and those grids that make up the atmosphere of the weather model, the weather interacts with the ground, right? Certain slopes get more radiation, for example. Upper elevations get more snow. Parts of the forecast area get more snow. And so we tried to pick model points that best represent that. One challenge of running Snowpack and getting it started is getting endless amounts of data from a weather model into the format that the Snowpack model needs to run. And one of our first big successes with running Snowpack here at ESAC, which has been adopted by other small Avalanche centers across the country, is we utilize Herbie, which is a program that pulls specific variables from your weather model of choice. Those weather models get stored on Amazon Web Services on the internet for seemingly ever. And then we created what's called a SMET generator. The SMET is that meteorological file for Snowpack. And we wrote some code, a team of myself, the snow geek, and then 2 computer geeks put together some code that automates that process. So it runs Herbie in less than 15 minutes, gets the data we need, and then it updates our SMET file automatically, and then I can run Snowpack without manually putting in lines and lines of data. So that was a pretty cool success for us. Next, we're going to look at our validation program. Our validation program closely matches the recommendations by a group called, very cleverly, Ava You can thank the Canadians for that. We are an international working group of Avalanche forecasters, software developers, and snow scientists and modeling experts that are trying to take this whole world of snowpack modeling and make it useful for Avalanche forecasters, the same way that high-powered computing in the 80s and 90s revolutionized weather forecasting. And now weather forecasters are looking at a whole bunch of different weather models and then deciding what the forecast is going to be based on that. We are trying to take that same leap and make this useful to Avalanche forecasters. So we're doing a monthly validation schedule. 1 field observation day each month. One of our forecasters or a volunteer goes and digs a hole near one of our model points, a full depth profile. And then we use that real data to compare and correct the model. So this is from a couple years ago. This is an actual profile of Tioga Pass on the right, and then the model profile after it's been corrected on the left. And if you've seen snow pit graphs, you know that those are pretty similar, which is cool. So the manual, aside from being able to correct a profile with it, the manual profiles also allow us to start with an actual physical starting point and then push the snowpack model forward into the future with weather model data. And this is an example of a model chain from some Europeans in Tyrolia. And they've created this model chain that they call AWESOME. And I don't remember what AWESOME stands for, Avalanche Warning European something. But they started messing around with, hey, what if we started snowpack from actual holes in the ground and then use the weather model to push it forward? And their research found that if you want to know what's going to happen during an upcoming storm with that persistent weak layer that's in your snowpack, you can run snowpack model from your actual hole in the ground before the storm. And their profiles were incredibly accurate for a week and up to a month in the future. And so we piggybacked on some of that. And last season, we started using our validation profiles to initialize snowpack in the same way. So you can see in previous graphs that we've looked at, the snowpack kind of gradually developed, and this one just starts there. And that's because that started with an actual physical profile and then was pushed forward with the weather model. This is for the Rock Creek area. Take a look at the graph on the right there for the individual profile at the end of the model run. And then this is us forcing snowpack with just the weather station, or with just the weather model data. And we'll compare the two. So the thing I like about this is the snow depths are very similar in what we're doing with the weather model and what we're doing with the actual hole in the ground. And if you notice that most of the colors are similar, this light blue color is that weak facety sugary snow. And then the dark blue is just really big facets called deptor. And because there's a cutoff size in the snowpack model, just really big facets are deptor. And so these are very, very similar. But there are some key differences that make our actual hole more accurate, and that's that melt freeze crust, which is the red stripe in this profile. But overall, this is enough similarities to give us more confidence in what we're doing at that Rock Creek model point. So I don't want to just look at pretty colors and graphs all winter. I want it to be useful for my avalanche forecast, right? And we've had some success here at ESAC with that. So one of our successes is using the model to give us more confidence, give us more information, confirm, tip us off to persistent weak layers. On January 12th, 2024, we had a persistent slab problem in the forecast area here. And there was a skier that was buried in this avalanche on San Joaquin Ridge in the afternoon. And we got this photo in the afternoon. And then we wanted to go investigate, right? Somebody got buried in an avalanche. We're trying to figure out what's going on with the persistent slab problem. But a storm came in, kicked up the avalanche danger to considerable. It was no longer safe to access this terrain. But we run a Snowpack model within 2 miles of this area, and I was able to get to some mellower terrain within 1 mile of this area on the same aspect and elevation. And so what you have on the left here is our Snowpack modeling point for that area, and then on the right we have my actual hole in the ground. And what I like about this, hey, you can see it, cool. What I like about this is that the snow height with the red dotted line when the accident was is almost exactly the same in my profile, it's just a little bit over 1 meter. And then there's a variety of different snow grains up in the upper snowpack here, but then this blue layer right here, that's a layer of facets that was buried January 2nd, and that's what that layer in my snowpack is. And then there was a harder layer that started out as melt freeze crust, but became faceted. And here's some pink wet snow grains that became faceted. And then underneath that, there was some big depth hoar on top of a melt freeze crust. And there's some big depth hoar on top of a melt freeze crust. So that gave us a lot more confidence in what was going on, both in our Snowpack model and what was going on where that person got buried. Now let's take a look at the photo again. You can see 2 crowns. There's an upper crown across the top, and then a step down crown further down. And so based on my hole, the Snowpack model, and this photo, pretty good guesstimate that that avalanche failed in that upper facet layer and then stepped down to that lower depth hoar layer, which we would be unable to confirm on a day where it was unsafe for us to go dig a hole there. So another case that we've had frequent success with the Snowpack model is giving us more decision-making tools for wet snow problems. Real quick, when I look at the output from the Snowpack model, I can ask it to show me a bunch of different factors, right? So this one, I've asked it to show me liquid water content in every layer of the Snowpack. That's what that blue is. And we've had frequent success with this, but one kind of super cool case was last year on January 10th. There was some uncertainty in the weather forecast, and we didn't know whether wet loose avalanches were going to be a problem. So what I'm looking at here is our Sawmill model point. That's the name of the weather station, and for the January 9th run. So we could look on January 9th at January 10th in this model point. And if you see next to the line where I'm frozen, it gets dark blue there. That's because liquid water in the model has just started to drip down to the snowpack. And if you look over on the right there, those red snow grains, that's wet snow. And that blue line is the amount of liquid water content, which is over 5%. And then the model time here, if you look at the time stamp at the bottom, we're using weather model time, which is UTC. So this is 1 p.m. on the 10th. And then a forecaster went to some south-facing slopes, and at 1 p.m. started seeing a lot of small wet loose avalanches in the upper snowpack.
Steve, this is from old snow, isn't it?
What's that?
We had no snow that time of the year, so this is from just old snow.
Correct. Yeah, it's from the surface melting rather than, say, rain on snow. Yeah. We have some anecdotal experience with a single wet slab release about the time that Snowpack told us it would happen, but I don't have like hard data on that like this. And then we frequently have good decision support from the Snowpack model for this kind of surface wet snow avalanches. So let's acknowledge some limitations of what we're doing here based on computing capacity, weather station capacity, my laptop's capacity. These are all the HER weather model points for our forecast area. And so it's like a regional scale of data here, right? And we're running individual point scale models. So there's a scaling mismatch there, right? So way to think about this is, again, the Tioga Pass weather station, and then the little black dot up there is the grid point from the HRRR weather model that we're using to run the Snowpack model. And the HRRR weather model is a 3-kilometer grid. So CalTopo here allowed me to draw a 1.5 kilometer radius circle around that point. And if I ask it to show me what the terrain in that circle is like, you can see all of the different types of terrain and aspects and elevation that are in that circle. So the bottom line is that we need to downscale the 3-kilometer square down to a single point somehow. And right now, me comparing the weather station data and putting a lot of work in Excel to correct the model is our downscaling. Another drawback of doing it this way is when we can't get to these weather stations anymore and we can't dig a hole later in the season, or we get deep snow in the Sierra here sometimes, you may have heard. And when I can no longer dig a full profile all the way to the ground, or when the weather station goes down and I'm not getting the data I need to correct the model, we have a lot more uncertainty in Snowpack. It's unverified. Make sense? The future. So Simon Horton at Avalanche Canada has been working for years and has taken the biggest step in North America towards operationalizing the Snowpack model. Avalanche Canada has a centralized portal where forecasters are currently viewing model outputs daily. The model goes for 2 days into the future. They're using the Canadian high-resolution weather model to generate 200,000 profiles per day for all of Canada and the northern United States. They run so many model points that they can analyze similarity and differences in the output, and then they can map things like areas that have a higher concentration of persistent weak layers, or areas that are getting more snow. And they can look at all the different profiles, and then they can cluster areas like this into areas of like Snowpack. So if you played around on the Avalanche Canada website, or maybe the Colorado Avalanche Information Center website, their zones change daily. What areas in the forecast area are green or red or orange based on similar snowpack, and this is how they're doing that. They are also utilizing an averaging tool. Over on the right here, what you're looking at is the upside down many points graph there. That's all of the profiles in a given cluster above tree line. And then the single snowpack graph on the side of that is the averaged snowpack for that elevation band. Same with near tree line and below tree line. So regional weather input, regional snowpack model output. The Colorado Avalanche Information Center is utilizing the same dashboard, but because we're south of the border and south of where the Canadian model goes, they're using the WRF weather model to do the same thing across Colorado. The Utah Avalanche Center is currently developing their own dashboard that they hope to make public by 2027. And they are running the Snowpack model to present with weather model data, and then forcing it into the future, or I'm sorry, with weather station data, so pretty accurate profile to now, and then forcing it into the future with weather model data. And they're using a bunch of post-processing parts of the Snowpack model, which means like, Snowpack is run, now let's look at that data and have it tell us how unstable a certain interface or layer is based on the grain size, things that we know about the physics of the snowpack. They're having it tell them whether surface hoar may have formed or there's facets in the top of the snowpack. They're even playing around with it, telling them a suggestion for what the danger rating might be on a given aspect or elevation based on the snowpack model. Travis Morrison, the developer of this, has offered to run this for ESAC through this dashboard, which is cool. So right now, Besides Canada and the Europeans that are heavily invested in snowpack modeling, these are all the avalanche centers in the United States that are currently playing with snowpack operationally. I think the Flathead Avalanche Center may begin to use this year again, which is cool. But I put us down here in red because we were one of the first buy-ins in the country, which is awesome. And we have helped get other small avalanche centers started using our program. Success kid. Yeah, so this year I am part of a small working group of US avalanche forecasters at small, like not state or whole country run, but small avalanche centers. And we are meeting every month and filling out a form every week about what the best practices for snowpack modeling might be and how it might be most useful for avalanche forecasters. And it's highly likely that next year or in the coming years, the National Avalanche Center will provide every avalanche center in the Western United States with that Avalanche Canada dashboard, and we'll be able to select our region and the weather model we want to drive it with, and then be able to use all of the same tools that the Canadians and the Euros and the Colorado are. Take a deep breath. Questions?